You guys killed me in the comments for the ProRes RAW versus R3D files, so I had to make a part 2. What's up everybody, Anthony Saratelli here of Jersey Filmmaker, and a couple weeks ago I released a video, ProRes RAW files versus R3D files, and you guys crushed me in the comments. Before we get into that, I want to say that last week was the first time since I started this channel that I did not upload for the entire week. I'm very upset about that, but lots going on and lots of time for these comments to settle in so I could get back at you. So instead of replying via typing, I decided to bring some comments onto the show so we can discuss them and figure out what I did right, what I did wrong, if any, in either direction. Let's just talk through it. Before I get into any of the comments though, if you haven't seen the video, click up here right about now so you can go back and check that out so you understand what we're talking about as we move along here. Again, backing up, as I mentioned in that video, this was not a thorough test. It was very simple. I needed to do something quickly. I didn't have a lot of time to do so. And there were a lot of haters out there telling me I didn't do the test right, which I understand I didn't do it perfectly, but I still think it proved a valid point, so let me explain. We got a lot of comments about skin tones, and we got a lot of comments about me not lighting them exactly the same. Understandable. The skin tones were kind of irrelevant. It was two different cameras. I was super sunburned in the first shot, like I mentioned, so I don't know why everyone's hitting on that so hard. Just let that be. The point of this was that how it recovered the highlights was incredible. We'll go through this again and I'll explain why I think it's so incredible. I just don't think there's any other codec out there that is doing what this thing can do. I still don't know how it's done. I'm not an expert on Final Cut, which people also got at me for. I'm not a Final Cut expert by any means. I actually hate Final Cut and I wish it was dead. I do understand that it does a lot of things better, like play with ProRes files more efficiently because it's an Apple product, as is ProRes, but still, I don't like the workflow of Final Cut, so it's just not for me. So let's jump into comments so we could straighten some things out, and we'll start with Leonard Crahan. I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry, Leonard, if not. But Mr. Crahan says, I think you made a big mistake. The first one you can't change using Final Cut. Premiere would be bad too. Use DaVinci. Final Cut and Premiere mess with the codecs and color spaces. And show the scopes so you and we can see what is really happening when you blow the highlights with the raw settings and or the exposure wheel. So starting with my first mistake and the fact that I used Final Cut and you recommend that I use DaVinci, that's quite impossible. You must not have watched any of my ProRes RAW videos because every time I do mention it is an Apple and Atomos product that they combined to create and is only available in Final Cut. I'm sure it'll be available in DaVinci and Premiere and everything else as well as time goes, but for now, they're keeping it to themselves so that they can probably turn a profit a little bit before they license it out or turn over their secret sauce to these other companies to incorporate into their editing software or color software. Show the scopes. That is a great point, Leonard. I'm gonna actually go over to the computer right now and do that so you can see exactly what's going on. Okay, here we are over on the computer in Final Cut and I've brought up the scopes, which is again a great point. I should have done this earlier. But here are the scopes and you see that everything is going well beyond 110 here. You can't even see it. But let's do what we did earlier. This is the ProRes RAW file and we're gonna pull this down and here comes everything. This is just amazing. Now what's really cool is so everything comes back in. So we have all the highlights. The only thing that seems clipped is this little bit right here and this little bit right here. Those are the only two things that actually clipped. You can see the line from the clipping. This line gets in the way when I move, but you see right above this line is those lines. That is clipped. Everything else comes back. I mean, everything else comes back and all the shadows are there too. So it's really impressive that you can do this. Now let's move over to the red file. Immediately you can see that this is clipped. Like this stuff isn't just flying off the chart like it was over here. Let's pull this back up just to make a point here. So when this is up at where it started, you could see like this is pushing to the max 110 and it's just going beyond. You can kind of tell that it's going beyond. Whereas here it doesn't even get to 100 and it maxes out. It's completely clipped. So no matter what we do, whether that's bring down the ISO, doesn't matter, still clipped, look at the nastiness. All right, let's put that back to where it was. You bring this down, still clipped, like it's not bringing back anything, it's just lowering everything, literally just lowering it down. It's not bringing anything back. I mean, it's just not the same. There is no other codec that I know of that does what this is doing. This is unbelievable that it pulls, look, everything just keeps coming. Where it's not clipped, it's still not clipped. It's amazing. I don't know why everyone was hating on me for the way I did this test. It really didn't matter how these were exposed. They were both overexposed, yet this still comes back. I know I didn't show these scopes, so maybe that's what the problem was, but if you're seeing this right now, I think you should believe that this codec's amazing. So moving on, the next comment is from Tyler Friesen, and he says, the red footage looks way better. If you look up red workflow, you'll see that this test is not very accurate. You need to use the correct workflow for the footage to compare properly. The red footage does look way better as far as, I mean, if we want to go towards skin tones again, yes, but it doesn't look better when you pull down the highlights. It actually looks awful. It doesn't bring back the highlights, so yes, the red footage looks better, but this wasn't the point of the test. The point was you see how much the highlights are coming back, so the red footage loses in this case. As far as the red workflow, I think I know red footage pretty well, but I don't know Final Cut. So if there is another workflow that you're talking about, I'd love to hear it, because if I am doing it wrong because I didn't bring it into Final Cut correctly or something, please bring that forward, because I just don't know it. I don't know Final Cut, like I said. Hate Final Cut. Next comment is from Maxime Nevu. Seriously? The Sony file is ridiculously overexposed compared to the overexposed R3D. It's the reason why your skin looks so bad. You guys with the skin, it's irrelevant in this test. I will do another test to show you the difference in skin tones. Yes, the red will win, but it's not relevant to this test. And to the point that you say the Sony file is ridiculously overexposed compared to the red file, is just more to my point. The fact that it is more overexposed makes it even more crazy that the ProRes RAW file comes back and the red file does not. So if anything, it makes my point a little bit stronger, I think. You guys got me questioning myself now. Next up, Tom Cypher, he says, this is because ProRes RAW is 12 bits per channel. If there would be a compressed, for example, H.264 file with 12 bits per channel, you could have done almost the same tricks with the exposure. Nothing special here about ProRes RAW codec itself, except that it is fast and thus comfortable for real-time response in the work editor. R3D RAW files are also 12-bit and they're not quite doing the same thing, so I'm not sure what you're saying here when you say it's not special. I actually don't think there's any other codec out there that does what ProRes RAW is doing. So I do think it's special. Maybe you know something I don't know. I'd love to hear that, because I don't understand how ProRes RAW is working. Again, they've kind of hidden that in Final Cut, which I do think is why none of these other companies have implemented it yet. They don't know how. I think it's a little bit of a secret, and they're going to release that, I'm sure, at some point, and they're probably going to have to pay for it. Adobe might have to pay for it. DaVinci might have to pay for it to be able to put it into their systems. Again, this is all speculation. I don't know the answers to these things. If somebody does have some insider info or behind the scenes info about how this technically works, I'd love to hear it, because at this point, I think it just works, but we don't really know how. Gravity Media Productions says, another super interesting video. I know how much time these take up on top of everything else in work and life. You do a great job and we appreciate the info. Thanks, Gravity, I appreciate that. They do take a lot of time and effort, but I enjoy doing them, so I'm glad you like them. This one's a little bit redundant to some of the other ones, but Antonio Forjas says, hi, I think you didn't do the comparison correctly. You should have shot both with the exact same lighting, not the way you did. For the ProRes RAW, you didn't shine a bright light on your face like you did for the R3D. So right there, your test fails. Next time, you must shoot the exact same scene with the same light. If you're going to put more light, it has to be for both cameras and not only for one. Try to shoot the ProRes RAW with the light shining on your face like you did with the red, and you will probably see that you'll have the same result. So I completely agree with you. I should have done them with the same exact lighting on the same exact day, but I did shoot, like I said, that ProRes RAW in a couple minutes. I just needed to grab something, and then about a week later, I decided, let me compare it to the R3D files. So unfortunately, I couldn't do them in the exact same situation, but if you look back at the scopes we just showed, or even visually just look at the two images, you can see that the ProRes RAW file is way more overexposed and still comes back. So I don't think you would have got the same result at all. It actually would have been still recoverable in ProRes RAW and probably still very much not on the R3D files. Next up, Victor Petrovanich says, I see that the Final Cut Pro X tool doesn't work well on the red, but you didn't try the FLUT exposure control in the red RAW settings. Can you try it? Yes, I can. So back over here to look at the FLUT control, which is actually still a control here in Final Cut, but if you look in either Premiere or in Red Cine X, FLUT is gone. It's actually called Exposure Assist, which you can see here pulls down quite a bit. But still, even in Red Cine X, look how overexposed a lot of this is. You can see the scopes not doing very well, but just wanted to show you this quickly in here. But let's go back over to, let me put this back to 0 or it's not going to work. Back in Final Cut. So over here, again, FLUT control is so minimal. It literally doesn't do anything. I don't know why, but the FLUT is just, I mean, FLUT is in general a very minimal exposure adjustment. So here's the full exposure. So again, we could bring this down and just go exposure here instead of exposure wheel. So bringing this down, I mean, you know, it brings back a lot, but still look at right here, overexposed. This is not coming back. This is all gone. And then even if we pull the FLUT down or up, it's not doing anything. So we could pull this down too if you want. Still crushed right at the top. Again, all in the nose, all this stuff. It's not recoverable. Once it's gone, it's not recoverable, but somehow in ProRes RAW, it is. And last but not least, a comment from Mr. Didi. I can tell that you don't use Final Cut Pro X much. Touche. There's an auto LUT applied to the footage now that I hate because you always have to remove it before you start working with log footage. If you just start working with the color before that, you get the awful looking skin tones and blown out footage you saw there. I also recommend Bert DeGrave's Sony to Arri LUT for S-Log3 footage. Finally, this video should have been 5 minutes long. Edit. That's hurtful. I put a lot of time into these. Very interesting point about the auto applied LUT, which does happen, and let's go back over to the computer to check that out. So back over here, looking at the ProRes RAW footage again, it's already dropped into a decent exposure, but what he's talking about over here is this RAW to log conversion and camera LUT. So it'll probably come in at Sony S-Log3 / S-Gamut3.Cine, which is what Sony works in. But if I shuffle back and forth from having these conversion and LUTs applied, I honestly don't see a difference. That's with the LUT, that's without the LUT. So, I mean, great point that it is applied automatically, but even if you take them off, it's not doing much. So the fact that you say that because this could have been on was why the skin tones were so bad and why the footage was so blown out, I think is completely incorrect. The skin tones are bad because I had burnt skin and it's a Sony, and it was blown out because I blew it out intentionally. So that's enough, a lot of the same stuff over and over. I don't know that this proved anything or not. I just wanted to answer some of these questions. I didn't feel like typing all this out. It was a lot easier to show and or explain by voice. I had a good amount of views and a good amount of comments on that video, which is awesome because that means that people are watching and people are interested. So I'm glad that they're coming. I don't care if you're hating on me or not. Come at me, bring on the comments. I love to chit chat about this stuff and figure it out. I'm not always right, that's for sure. So please, please, please let me know what you think, when I'm wrong, when I'm right, so we can all keep learning together. And that's all for this episode. I hope it's not too long. I'll try to edit the best that I can. If you liked it, please click that like button, subscribe, and hit that little bell if you haven't already so you can get alerts to all future episodes. If you have any comments or questions, you obviously know where to leave them, or you can hit me up on any of my social medias, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, at Jersey Filmmaker. Thanks so much for watching. Sorry for the delay between episodes. I'm working on catching up, but in between, remember to get out there, don't wait, go create, and I'll see you next time.